Hi there. This is my commentary on the discussion that John Vervake and Jonathan Pageau had on Rebel Wisdom probably 2 weeks ago now. I'm not quite sure, something like that. And it's interesting because Rebel Wisdom announced today that they're going to suspend their brand, which I didn't listen to the whole announcement. It's kind of sad in a way, but in a way it's admirable because they've decided that that pattern of value has run its course and they're moving in dynamic directions. So the pursuit of dynamic quality is often at odds with the pursuit of money, and that is partially what we're going to talk about today. Because Rebel Wisdom's doing just fine financially, as you can imagine. So that's kind of interesting. It's an interesting thing to happen in this corner of the internet that sort of exemplifies perhaps a new stance in how we approach business, let's say. There's probably a lot of ways and a lot of things that people will say about it, but anyway. So I'm getting a new computer soon, and hopefully OBS will operate on that so I can actually comment on videos as we watch them, but I still have to do it in this kind of cut and paste way, so bear with me. So I really enjoyed this discussion, and in it were a lot of things that kind of have happened over the course of the corner being in extant for however long it's been. 2017, I'd say, is when it first opened. Maybe even 2015. Or maybe 2016 when Jordan Peterson did the C16 thing, and then all the commentaries came after that. Paul Vanderklay and began to comment on Jordan Peterson, and right in 2015, that's when John Vervake and Peterson had the talk on meaning. Jonathan Pageau came into the corner with that first video, and I think that was. Sorry, I didn't do my research on this. I'm just talking off the top of my head. That was 2017, 2016, right around then. So that is roughly the formation of this corner. So a lot of what they were talking about was where this corner is now, and it was a beautiful discussion, and these two men really like and appreciate each other, even though one is a theist and one is not. And it leads us to believe that perhaps there's a way of reconciliation when a theist and a non-theist can reconcile the way that John Vervake and Jonathan Pageau have. Then there's hope for the world. Because roughly they both want the same thing, and so do the rest of us in this corner, I think, and that's why we're here.
Oh, what's the hair? We're in academic. The reason is because curiosity is something that's very much loved by a kind of, marketing and commodification and innovation and so curious.
So I like this opening because one thing that makes John Vervake really interesting, and probably why students like him so much, is he can be kind of funny and do this kind of dramatic, reductionist kind of theatrical poking fun at ideas that really aren't that useful. So I like this first part. So I'm going to start with the clips now, and then I'm going to comment on each clip. There's 15 clips.
So when I don't know what to say, sometimes I'll just I'll have my little John Vervake dictionary, reach into that dictionary and pull in a word.
This is the way we're framing Vervake's great contribution to this corner, and in fact, what a lot of this corner is oriented around is his language. He gives us the precise language for the processes that we're going through. And they hearken back to ancient wisdom, and they incorporate modern psychology and modern neuroscience. So, and he's worked really hard on this vocabulary. So even though it can be a little rough to actually integrate this vocabulary, and it's like a bit of memorization, I get that. These are static intellectual patterns, but they express precisely an understanding of processes, dynamic pattern, dynamism, let's say. And it makes it easier to communicate concepts and processes that we know we're going through as we try to make sense of modern times and fix, I guess the meaning, fix whatever the problem is, fix the meaning crisis. So this language really helps with all these disparate dialogues in this little corner, because we do have a common language. And like I said, it takes some study to master the vocabulary, but it's worth it. His language is a nice gap in between our social understanding of the sort of intellectual ideas that aren't really readily available in our standard Western ways of looking at things, because so much of this language references ancient wisdom and psychology and cognitive science and other things, and brings it all together like Jonathan, like John always says he wants to do. He wants to make all these disciplines talk to each other, and one of those disciplines is heavily oriented around spirituality, and another one is heavily oriented around ancient wisdom. And those are things that a lot of people don't have access to. So this language is really valuable, and it's understandable how someone who has a really good system like Jonathan Pageau can find utility in this language, and we all do in this corner.
You realize that understanding relevance and understanding how relevance works and the manner in which we engage with the world is so important for us to make sense of what's going on, and to not just be tools in this machine cog, the cog in this machine that's running and we don't know what's going on.
Attention and relevance realization, of course, John's probably prime term, because it's the one that really does scale isn't the right word, is useful to every aspect of this corner, is key to what's happening in this little corner of the internet, because we know that function of relevance realization, attention grabbing, is being ridden parasitically by lower level concerns. More individualistic, ego-driven, dopamine-driven concerns at the expense of meaning, thus the meaning crisis. Or that's one way to put it, at least. So to reclaim our attention is key, and there's a lot of work around doing just that. And I think a big part of adopting is adopting new worldviews that incorporate what was lost, whether that's rediscovering God or the real world in Vervake vocabulary, or rediscovering ancient wisdom, or connecting again with our own right hemisphere processes. There's a lot of other ways to put this, but in this corner, we kind of understand what we're talking about when we're talking about reclaiming our attention. Because our attention has settled on such low-level concerns, and as such, we as a species have become so easy to control psychologically, and certainly whatever's happening in this world, whatever powers that be, are taking advantage of that.
All this little, what do they call the little corner of the internet or whatever?
Yeah.
So I included that for obvious reasons, because John is very nice to give me credit for naming this corner of the internet, even though I don't participate as much as I should, and I feel bad about that. Because John always gives credit, and that's part of the attitude we are trying to adopt in this corner, is acknowledging the collective intelligence. And this is one of the antidotes to the ego traps that we've fallen into, like I was saying before, because we have lower level concerns. So when you start to see that you are a node and a hub, you are your own person, you are an individual on the one hand. On the other hand, you are a node and hub in this collective intelligence. And I do like that term. I think that's from one of those futurist guys, or I don't know even how to characterize them, on Rebel Wisdom, the Jordan Hall, Daniel Schumacher, who's that other fellow from South Africa, very intelligent, Jamie Wheel, that group, the collective intelligence. I don't know who coined that term, but they tend to orient their contributions around that.
One of my defining features of dialogos is that both people can get to a place they couldn't get to on their own. That doesn't mean they come to agreement. That's the mistake, to think, no, we failed because we don't agree on all these propositions. I think that's the incorrect goal.
So one of the best tools in this corner is, of course, dialogos. And if we're talking about shifting priorities, we're trying to shift out of winning, individuals winning the argument. And I don't want to, I want to be clear. I don't think individualism is a bad thing. It's something we've kind of that we have progressed into, individual worth. From, let's say, the time that Christ acknowledged that all people, prostitutes, beggars, lepers, and Pharisees, and priests, and tax collectors, and aristocrats, all had an essential nature that was equally valuable. So the value of the individual, and this is Peterson's proposition, is of supreme importance in the West. But it is only half the picture, and we're going to talk about, a lot of times we're talking about this half of the picture, and the other half of the picture is the collective, which we've kind of forgotten. So one of the best tools for getting that back, shifting away from winning and into co-creating the frame in which you want to operate, and that reincorporates true meaning, or even sacredness, you could say. So that means having conversations with people in which you actually listen to them. What a concept. Not only do you listen to them, but you actually take what they're saying and you use whatever's coming from your boxcars and use that dynamic quality between you, between what you believe and what your value system is and where you are on the track. And meet that person on his own track, and in between, the dynamism where you meet at, let's just say, the relay station, puts you both on a new direction. And Dialogos is a great tool, and it's being refined and developed in Vervake's corner with a lot of interesting and intelligent people.
I hope you take this as a compliment. You remind me of Goethe in that you're trying to get people to this fundamental new way of seeing the world. That isn't just a way of having new propositions, but like seeing the world like in this fundamentally different and profound way.
I think that any real change must consist of a shift of lenses, like I was talking about earlier in terms of attention. For us to take our attention to a higher level, we also need better metaphysics. It does need to be a complete, well, maybe not complete, but it does need to be a more encompassing worldview rather than the typical materialistic or atomistic or subject-object worldview. I know I say this 1,000,001 times, and this is Pirsig's major proposition. But a new lens has to be much more aware of the full nature of reality. Like I said, we do need a new compelling metaphysical framework to make fuller sense of reality, and Jonathan has a really good one. Obviously my favorite is Pirsig's, and I've talked several times about the difference, I think, between Pirsig's and Jonathan's, because Jonathan's is very much oriented in the social level. However, his metaphysics has this underlying structure that fully explains reality. It just tends to focus on the social level because that's what Christianity is about, and that makes sense. But underneath that is a metaphysics that is on par with Pirsig's in a lot of ways, I'd say.
There's been beautiful music playing, and then somebody shuts it off, and you sort of, that had been it had sort of gone into the warp and woof of my mind without my realizing it. So there's a musicality about how he expresses himself. There's a lyricism. I really want you and Chris Mastropietro to talk at some point, because Chris is like that too, the lyricism.
Yes, he and Christopher Mastropietro should talk, definitely. I would love to hear that. Christopher Mastropietro does have one of the most beautiful ways of speaking of anyone I've met in my life. And Jonathan Pageau has his own way. It is lyrical in a different way. It's more like evoking something that we've lost, something ancient. A way, he talks like a modern person. I'm not saying that, he's anachronistic or anything. But when he's talking about his metaphysics, there is something that connects us with with the lineage or the totality. There is a sort of timelessness in his language. So I would love to see Christopher with his beautiful. Christopher's always looking for the precise word, kind of like, and I think this is one of the reasons why he and John Vervake get along, is because they're looking for the right vocabulary for the experiential thing, that the perception. And even though they are both scholarly and academic in some ways, especially John Vervake, they don't come across as pretentious. They come across as people who are trying to find the precision. And that's what makes them both so valuable to this corner, among many other things. But that is one thing that's major.
How would you frame or delineate this kind of wider space or this wider conversation?
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I worry that there's a bias, because I do think the meaning crisis is a thing and it's important. And I do think it's kind of that whole, and we have different names for it, but I think we're talking often about very convergent things. I guess one of the things I would add to that is not only the matter, but the manner. One of the things that seems to typify this corner of the internet is that we're trying to move into what I call dialogos, what I talked about before, when how Jonathan and I interact, and how it takes on a life of its own, because we're both seeking mutual movement and to afford each other insight and realization, and then that is in the service of right relationship, right? And that's a fundamentally different ethos than what you see through most of social media, a lot of the internet. So I think that manner, which I give the name to dialogos. I'm trying to pick up on many different things with that term. I think that is also an important thing. There's a commitment to that. And there's also a commitment to, and this is something I guess it's part of the manner. I think what we're also doing, and I'm trying to reuse a term that I got from Christianity. I don't think it's insulting to Christianity the way I'm using it. I think there's an attempt to rediscover and revalue fellowship as something distinct from specific friendship, or just being a member of a team or part of a corporation or whatever, right? And so because one of the things people often say, especially in more intense versions of like dialectic into dialogos, is they'll say, I didn't know that this kind of intimacy existed. It's neither sexual nor familiar nor friendship, but it's important, and I've always been craving it. They say that. And so I think another thing this corner of the internet is trying to do is to bring back into prominence the presence and the practice and the value of fellowship. So that's another thing that I don't see that as a value or even something that's being explored. And so for me, I use this metaphor of, we're trying to get the courtyard rather than the courtroom.
So as the social frame for dialogos, the word John uses here is fellowship. Intellectual, philosophical, and social fellowship that is so lacking in our lives since the atomization of society into individual pods, supposedly. Not really, of course. But so we think. Obviously, for John, this is modeled on Platonic dialogues that try to arrive at consensus about the nature of things. And for Jonathan, it's being a member of a community that puts God first. Either way, it means transcendence of the rugged individualism we purportedly possess. Not really ultimately. I mean, we're basically big human sheep in a lot of ways, in the throes of pathological materialism that plays right into our lust for ego porn. We are participating in the creation of something better in Dialogos, and that is not easy to do because we first have to contend with these psychological traps of ego, immune systems, of our value systems, of our moral systems, or anxiety about uncertainty. So we've got the traps: ego trap, value trap, anxiety trap. So it's hard to give up this no of holding in this system versus the yes of opening the system up to change. That's something that we rugged individualists really oppose, but That is what's missing.
Criticism they make is what they call civility porn. That a lot of the time, like this focus on kind of manners or the way that we interact actually can mask divisions, and sometimes kind of difficult conversations are not had, or sure. That's one of the criticisms I think is worth raising.
I think they get the cart before the horse. I think if you want deep differences to be deeply discussed in a way that might be transformative, there has to be trust.
So here, David Fuller calls what seems to be very nice conversation civility porn. I think that's because we're not used to people actually going at it with each other with openness. And it seems suspect because we do live, and this is going to come up a little bit later in the dialogue, we're so used to the hermeneutics of suspicion. That is the way we operate, is hermeneutics of suspicion. So when we see people being really nice to each other, we assume that they're up to something. And that seems to be right when you don't realize that openness is authenticity. We're not used to authenticity. So, and John's saying, no, we're really doing this. We've really transcended the hermeneutics of suspicion. We have gone a level up, and we're doing it because there's something better we want. We're not trying to get something out of someone, let's say.
We'll feel the tension, then we'll move on to something else, but then we know that in the next conversation we'll come back. Yeah. And so there'll be this circling where there's a mix of showing the person that you can trust them, and that it's like, this is not going to break our relationship, we trust each other, but then knowing, okay, this isn't over yet, we have to come back and we're going to discuss it. And so I think that I think that a lot of what I'm seeing in this critique sphere is what they would like to be able to put someone on trial, and then just kind of put out all the accusations and, what do you say to that, sir? What do you say to this? I mean, that's fine, whatever. That can exist, but I think that that's definitely not a model for a society, and it's not a model for showing how groups can exist. Because if we think about it that way, we're saying one of the things we have is a breakdown in the existence of these intermediary groups. Like we don't have communities anymore. Our families are broken. We don't have churches. We don't have intermediary organizations. We have the state, and then we have the individual, and everything else is being broken down in between. If we want to rebuild something like that, then we have to understand what it means. Because it's the same. If you live in a group and you would take on that critical approach, someone that lives in the same house as you, how long do you think you're going to be living with them?
What Jonathan's talking about is trust, something that's lost in terms of trust, getting back to a complex and nuanced social approach. The social level has been dismantled, and we don't need to go into why. Ken Wilber does a really good job in terms of describing it as boomeritis. There are a lot of reasons. We talk about this a lot. The Enlightenment started it, but it goes back further, etc. But there were some good reasons for some of that deconstruction. But the lessons we have learned from that deconstruction have kind of been resolved, and it's time to get back some of that social capital, which is trust. And Dialogos is one of the ways to do this, a way to discover what we have in common as human beings. The problem is if you only have the state and individuals and nothing in between, this kind of emulates the problem we have with materialistic metaphysics in general. For example, the stance of materialistic metaphysics has intellectual concepts, an intellectual understanding of atoms and nothing in between, and everything is atoms bottom up. Now, I understand there was, I think I talked previously about J.P. Marceau said, no, modern physics actually understands that there's irreducible physicality, so that's good. That's a good, that's a good way forward. But there is still so much that we're missing when you have this amalgam at the top and these fragments at the bottom and nothing in between. So biology kind of piggybacks off of, so in Pirsig's terms, this is the organic level, intellectual level, and the intellectual level understands the organic level, says everything is is oriented. Everything is some expression of the organic level, and that's all there is. It's Descartes, mind, matter. Biology piggybacks off the organic level in there, and the social level is dismissed as just being, it's explained away with evolutionary biology or evolutionary this, that, or the other thing, evolutionary psychology. I don't think any of those disciplines are bad in themselves as tools. But if you explain social behavior just with biology, which ends up being explained by these chemical and that molecule, then you are really, really missing something very critical. Because between matter and mind is all this stuff that allows mind to comprehend matter. And that's what we don't acknowledge, it's this whole evolution away from being animals to the human beings that we are, or reason, let's say, not reason in the Enlightenment sense, but reason in the Enlightenment sense on the one hand, classical reason, and a more quality, value-oriented reason that allows us to think about things. But we only have this because we've evolved through social, through the social level. And if you dismiss that social level as just being evolutionary biology, then you're missing something. You're not getting a good picture of who we are. So a modern viewpoint would have you believe that we unequivocally understand physics through that superior rationality, which just is, with just is. We don't understand. And then Persic said this. He says, rationality is a branch of the tree of mythos. We had to go through all the gods and all the religious stuff for thousands of years to even get to rationality. But we have the sense that rationality is just this, thing that intellect is, and we can understand everything in terms of atoms. It's like physics and mind, and everything else is ephemeral. And that's crazy. So John is saying, and Jonathan are both saying, rediscover trust in your fellow man, rediscover and revivify the rich and sophisticated social behavior, the way of acting with each other, the way of communicating with each other, the way of communing with each other that we've thrown away. That we, I'll talk about he talks about the hermeneutics of suspicion right after this, but I'm still mentioning it because you've probably seen the whole thing anyway. So we've thrown it away in a lot of ways, substituting the hermeneutics of suspicion, like all our social interactions are trying to figure people out, to get them to, have certain viewpoints of them and then move on. We got what we need out of them. We don't want stultified Victorian civility either, civility porn, let's call it civility porn. But we want to trust people authentically, and that will require a common desire for the good and a willingness to take that open stance of yes. So actually, I said that this is nuanced and sophisticated, but actually I think a desire for the good and an open stance are probably enough. It's just they're very hard to do with modern psychology and sensibility.
With it.
So this is an idea from Ricoeur, and the hermeneutics of suspicion is basically sort of given to the West by Marx, by Freud, by Nietzsche. It's the idea that there's underneath it there's always a secret agenda, a hidden motive, right? And and there's a lot,
the unconscious
or the unconscious, or the class struggle, or the will to power. Yeah. Or some systemic oppression, right?
This is what you're doing, but this is what you're really doing.
Yeah. The manifest and the latent, Weber made a distinction too. Bureaucracies are set up to do this is their manifest function, but they have this latent function. So you can see many thinkers coming to this. And the hermeneutics of suspicion is based on this idea that appearances are distracting, they're distorting, there's misleading, and what you want to do is you want to break through. What you're saying is, no, there are times when the appearances aren't distracting or distorting or deceptive. They're actually disclosing of reality. And I take that to be at least the ancient,
That aha moment.
an aha moment. And I take that when appearances do that for us, that's what the ancient, at least the ancient concept of beauty was. So the hermeneutics of beauty actually is primary, and the hermeneutics of suspicion is completely parasitic on it. And what I'm critiquing is the imbalance. Right? I'm saying, no, we should also be doing a lot to exemplify the hermeneutics of beauty for people, because I want to, in that manner, I want to challenge the prioritization, the implicit and almost unchallenged, uncriticized assumption that the hermeneutics of suspicion is the way in which we should move through the world.
So this is where he introduces the hermeneutics of suspicion, according to Rancourt, versus the hermeneutics of beauty. And the beauty is the big picture. It's wonder first. And hermeneutics of suspicion is a tool when things don't feel right. So it's not as if suspicion is something you should just toss out, and this is what a lot of spiritual bypassing forgets, is that you have to evaluate things. You can't just be, oh, well, we love everyone and it's great, because you know what happens with that stuff if you go into over compassion, let's say, if overly compassionate. You're not an adult. That's not an adult stance. You have to have this openness to other people and things and dynamic quality, what they're saying, listening to them, but you also need an evaluation. You need a tool for evaluation, and that's what suspicion is. The problem is, and this is what John says, is suspicion is the way we're approaching everything. And so you're missing this whole other half. Now, sure, there are con artists all over the place, and some of this has to do with the fact that we say that this is how things are, and we dispense with the good stuff, and society begins to evolve around the hermeneutics of suspicion. So, on the one hand, we have reason to be suspicious. On the other hand, the reason that we are suspicious and the way that society has evolved is because of that. But another reason society has evolved the way it has is because society's pretty much replaced all social and spiritual value with money, with the gain of material, with that money is a very efficient form of rationality, let's say. Does that make sense? I mean, money is the most efficient tool we have in a materialistic society. So that ends up being the key goal. And if money is the key goal versus being a stalwart person connected with something higher, which was the goal in the past, then that means untruth to get people to buy things is justified. And so when Jonathan says advertising is a perfect example of the hermeneutics of suspicion, he's right. Now, the hermeneutics of beauty line up absolutely with quality, with pure value. It is the unencumbered value of the inorganic molecules that hold the glass together. It is that valuing, that trust in our perception, like Jonathan says, that allows us to get through life. Seeing that again, rediscovering and appreciating that is part of that metaphysical shift. Appearances that disclose reality rather than obscure it are patterns of high quality. So when you are tuned into this, with this open stance on the front end, a readiness to evaluate on the back end, and a nice medium, a nice balance, like John was saying, then you can see that the patterns that disclose reality by their appearance are patterns of high quality. Maybe I'll go more into that, but that's just my initial understanding of that.
And the idea that the hermeneutics of beauty are primary, this is not just a statement that John is making. This is actually the manner in which you engage with your daily life every day,
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
When you walk out on the street and you don't think it's going to break apart, when you pick up a glass and it's holding the liquid in it,
Yeah.
you are engaging in a hermeneutics of beauty.
Trust.
It's just trust. It's just the idea that what is being disclosed to me, the appearance of it, is revealing what is true about it. And this is something which is actually the fuel for your life. Exactly. You couldn't function without it, and it is the fuel for everything that's good and that makes you feel alive. So although it is true that sometimes there are appearances can hide what is behind it, as John said, we have to remind people that the primary mode is this hermeneutics of beauty. And if you engage with it that way, and if you also, because one of the problems with the hermeneutics of suspicion is that if you engage others with that hermeneutics, the position in which you're in is a position from which you won't receive anything from the person in front of you, because I already figured you out. I figured you out. And so it's like, you do these things, but I know what's really going on. Whereas if you engage someone with just at first, I'm not saying it's not possible that John's lying to me, of course, but the first step is a yes, right? It's like, I come to you with a yes, and then we'll see later.
So please make note of this important statement of Jonathan's. He says, trust is the fuel for everything that's good and makes you feel alive. Wow. The stance of keeping the system, whatever system it is, open to quality applies to all patterns that have staying power and progress. We emulate that in our optimal stance, that yes to openness. And in Pageauian terms, dynamic quality is, in a way, the key to the social progress we need right now. It would be so... Can you imagine if the HR companies taught dialogos and this, what we're working on in our corner, versus some of the other trainings that try to enforce intellectual patterns on individuals, the state, the individual. Here's our intellectual stance, and here you individuals are, in order to emulate some lost social cohesion, in order to force social cohesion. To make it happen without relying on nasty, old-fashioned religious approaches. But religion happens, and that's why DEI often looks like an awkward, pieced-together cult.
You can describe it one way, and you're talking about beauty, and you can describe it another way, and you're talking about the experience of love. And I think this is one of Plato's great insights about how those are just interwoven together. And so the insight porn tends to go like this, where what people are doing is they're reinforcing, and they're making, the insights are more and more about how this is confirming together. And why that's so powerful for us is that's half of how truth works. So part of truth is how things confirm. Think about moments when you think something's really real. One is, oh look, everything fits together. That's why this was so real. But you also have these other moments as, holy cow, I didn't know that. And you think that makes that so real because it blows apart all my previous preconceptions.
This is so brilliant about truth. Yes, truth is half value patterns and half value itself, which is a process. So you got the pattern, and you got the value, the valuing, the quality, the dynamic quality. You can't, if you get stuck in patterns and try to preserve them as they are for whatever reason, usually fear of the unknown, preservation of ego, a fear of dismantling your value system, or anxiety about the unknown, I already said that, then any kind of change is unwelcome. You could call it certainty porn. And you're stuck. So how things fit together, that's seeing the pattern, how the pattern is established and structured. And holy cow, I didn't know that. That's the moment of quality, the valuing itself. That pre-intellectual awareness coming into your awareness. And that's how patterns blow apart and regroup or dissolve altogether. So I'm using the word pattern in the Pageauian sense, not, of course, in the eternal sense, the metaphysical sense of Jonathan, although there is some relation for sure.
There's no place I can stand on certain things where I can frame this. That's a mystery. And I think wonder is to put oneself into the momentum of mystery. And so it's very much about the being mode rather than the having mode. You're not trying to solve a problem, you're trying to enter through mystery into a right relationship about the depth of reality.
Being rather than having mode, remember that from Vervake's series. Mystery, not this, not that. What Pirsig would call the mu state. Unask the question. The question is not on the same level as what we're looking at. So we're conditioned to see things in a binary way in the West. And this is another way of saying the reverence for uncertainty is what's been lost in this modern way of thinking. What we have is the certainty of atomization. And atomization is the spawn of intellect and matter, which is what I mentioned before. But that mystery is that big picture, holistic, all-encompassing understanding of reality. And that is how true reality is experienced, is through that mystery.
Right, which is, I'm going to speak to you in such a way, right, that's going to always be almost like Tai Chi, always trying to move around the hermeneutic. I'm not going to try and hit you in the hermeneutics of substitution. I'm going to try and find a way to insinuate and weave my way in without participating in the hermeneutics of substitution. You've got to maintain Socratic integrity.
So this sums up the stance of Dialogos, which I would say might be, like John's saying here, like Tai Chi, always following the good, always trying to keep the harmony. This is where the Tao Te Ching really is one of the most wonderful texts. So we enter a world of harmonizing and reharmonizing, of following the better, of going on that quality track, of following the good versus debating, which is an individualistic venture, an ego venture. And it's not easy at first to take on this stance because we're so conditioned in the modern world to get our ego-driven dopamine hits versus this more serotonin-oriented satisfaction of this co-creating dopamine, serotonin. So I guess that sounds like I'm trying to explain away enlightenment or insight with biology, but these chemicals support higher social and intellectual values, ventures. They don't cause them, they don't explain them. You can't say, well, the only reason we're having insight is because of dopamine and serotonin. No, dopamine, serotonin, all this materialistic biological stuff is how, we take in the top-down good. The bottom-up biology takes in the top-down good. And both of them are both bottom-up and top-down. I think that you understand what I'm saying here.
They're just caught up in this mental game that they don't realize, or this mental sphere that they can't see the mechanisms of, trying to kind of tease it out so people can see it.
So Bob Newhart once had a very funny routine where the really bad therapist, and the person goes in and says all of their problems, and then Bob Newhart, as only Bob Newhart could do, he'd say, okay, so this is your problem, right? And this is your problem, this is your problem? Yeah, stop it! Stop doing it! Right? And it's great, and we know, and we laugh because we know that's absurd, right? And that, by the way, that joke by Bob Newhart is an example of the kind of irony I'm talking about.
Yeah, and you can see it. You can see that all the time now, which is so. An example you're seeing in the political discourse that I see all the time. They're saying something. They say themselves like, "Oh, he's far right," and what they mean by that is not clear. They mean like you shouldn't talk to them. You shouldn't never engage with them. You should either act as if they don't exist, or you should just tell them to stop being in the far right, or I won't talk to you. And it's like that's not how reality works. Like you can't. That's not. We have to be able to engage in conversation, be able to keep our distances, make sure people understand the differences. But the idea of saying just stop having that political opinion, right? That's basically on Twitter, is basically all that it is. Like, this person is stupid for having this political opinion, they should stop it. We're not going to get anywhere.
And here's
but the way Bob Newhart does it is to call attention to that, and just how absurd it is. Yeah, of course.
But the thing is, and here's where you can do that kind of irony, that overemphasis on the product of cognition and an underemphasis on the process and an undervaluing of the process is actually the hallmark feature of irrationality.
So Bob Newhart said was, "Stop it, are you some kind of kook?" And it's funny because that whole joke was about fear of driving, which at the time I had almost a debilitating fear of driving. It took me a long time to get over it. So that was really funny and upsetting to me with that joke. Just drive, are you some kind of kook? So I like this clip because what Jonathan is saying is really at the bottom of what's going on, say, in a platform like Twitter or whatever platform where, these political or ideological stances are being, the fights are going on. And I like this clip because Jonathan's pointing out that at the bottom of it is somehow we think that our will is going to change the other person. You know, you're an idiot. These are the reasons why Biden is great. You're an idiot. These are the reasons why Biden. Well, I don't think anyone thinks Biden is great. You're an idiot. These are reasons why this particular policy should be revoked. No, you're an idiot because this policy has done so much good. So, by calling them an idiot, we think we're going to change them. You know, I mean, really? It's funny to think about it in the way that Jonathan framed it, because it's exactly what's going on here. We think somehow that by forcing our supposedly individual beliefs, of course they're not, will somehow change the person over to our side. Get that dopamine hit where they say, oh yeah, you're right. Never going to happen. So I love this phrase, undervaluing of the process. And that phrase may be very well a great way of describing the meaning crisis. So I hope that makes sense, and I'll see you for the second half, and hopefully for some commentary on Pageau Peterson in Montreal.